Thaddeus called me on Tuesday afternoon, his voice dripping with what I recognized as his boardroom charm. "Mother, we've scheduled a family meeting this weekend to discuss your care arrangements. Reed and Imogen have already agreed to the division of responsibilities. I'll be handling your finances, of course. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I listened with my teacup poised halfway to my lips, the chamomile going cold as he continued outlining how they would streamline my affairs. My gaze drifted to the letter from Dr. Kincaid on my writing desk, its clinical language confirming what I'd suspected for months: stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Terminal, 6 months, perhaps 8 with aggressive treatment. "That's very thoughtful, darling," I replied, my voice steady despite the heaviness in my chest. "I'll see you all on Saturday." I hung up before he could hear the slight tremor in my breath. Outside my window, the morning fog rolled in from Mistral Harbor, shrouding the garden in a pearly haze. The roses I'd planted 40 years ago were just beginning their autumn bloom, deep crimson against the weathered stone of Wisteria Cottage. My children thought they knew everything about me. They pictured their mother as a fragile widow, an aging eccentric whose mind was slipping alongside her health. What they failed to understand was that Elowen Blackwood had never been as oblivious as they believed. The daughter of a chess grandmaster doesn't reach 78 without learning to see 5 moves ahead. I opened my bureau drawer and retrieved the leather-bound journal I'd kept since my husband Alaric passed 12 years ago. The edge of a legal document peeked from between its pages, my revised will, signed and notarized 3 months earlier. The timing had been fortunate. I'd acted on instinct, not proof. But instinct had served me well throughout my life. My fingers traced the embossed monogram on the journal's cover. Inside were not merely an old woman's memories, but a carefully documented history of subtle manipulations, overheard conversations, and financial discrepancies that told a story my children never imagined I could piece together. 3 months ago, I'd begun to notice the pattern. Now, as I faced the final chapter of my life, I realized it was time for one last lesson in consequences. I first suspected something was amiss during the spring solstice celebration. Each year, I host a gathering at Wisteria Cottage for the town's oldest families. The tradition dates back to my grandmother's time, an evening of music, poetry, and reminiscence beneath the ancient wisteria that gives my home its name. That evening, as twilight settled over Mistral Harbor and the string quartet played Debussy in the garden, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I had stepped inside to retrieve more champagne flutes when Thaddeus's voice drifted from my study. "She doesn't need to know. The collection alone is worth millions, and she hasn't had it appraised since Father died." My eldest son's voice carried a dismissive edge I'd never heard before. "The Morisot alone could set us each up for years." "Lower your voice," Imogen hissed. "This isn't the time or place." I froze, my hand on the cabinet door. The Morisot had been Alaric's wedding gift to me, a small, luminous painting of a woman reading in a garden, the artist's brushstrokes capturing perfect contentment in blues and greens. "Reed's hesitating," Thaddeus continued. "Says he's worried about her finding out." "Reed worries too much," Imogen replied. "Mother hasn't even noticed the Klimt sketch is gone. I replaced it with a reproduction months ago." The champagne flutes forgotten, I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. The Klimt, a delicate drawing of intertwined lovers, had hung in my bedroom for decades. I'd glanced at it just that morning, never suspecting it wasn't the original. I forced myself to breathe evenly as their whispered conversation continued, discussing values, auction houses, and the difficulty of liquidating art without proper provenance. I hadn't raised fools, evidently, just thieves. When their voices moved toward the doorway, I slipped into the music room, pretending to adjust the flowers until they passed. I returned to my guests with a practiced smile. the champagne flutes balanced expertly on a silver tray as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The next morning, I called my oldest friend, Aviva Thornfield, who had served as curator at the Mistral Harbor Museum of Fine Arts for 40 years before her retirement. "I need your discretion," I said when she arrived, the sea mist still clinging to her silver hair. "I believe some of my pieces have been replaced with forgeries." Aviva's eyebrows rose, but she asked no questions. Instead, she removed her rain jacket and followed me from room to room. Her trained eye examined each piece in my collection: the small Renoir study in the dining room, the cassette in the hallway, the 3 Paul Klee drawings in the music room. After 2 hours, she sat heavily in my reading chair by the window. "7, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. 7 forgeries, Eloan. Good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. The Klimt, the Morisot, the small Cézanne, both Sargents, the Cassat, and the William Morris sketch." I poured us both a measure of scotch, though it was barely noon. My hands didn't shake, which surprised me. Perhaps I'd been expecting this confirmation. "The combined value?" I asked. "4 million at least, possibly more depending on the market." Aviva studied me over her glass. "You know who did this." It wasn't a question. After 50 years of friendship, she knew me too well. "My children," I said, the words like glass in my throat. "Not Reed, I think, or at least not willingly. But Thaddeus and Imogen, certainly." "Have you called the police?" I stared out at the harbor, where fishing boats bobbed in the morning light. Alaric, and I had watched that view for 40 years together. He'd built this life for us, expanded his father's modest shipping business into Blackwood Enterprises, a corporation that now employed half the town. "They're my children, Aviva." "They're thieves," she countered, not unkindly. "Yes," I sighed, "and I need to understand why." I didn't share with Aviva my deeper concerns, the irregularities I'd noticed in my financial statements, the strange looks that passed between Thaddeus and Imogen at family dinners, the way Reed couldn't meet my eyes lately. My middle child had always been my sensitive one, too easily swayed by his siblings' stronger personalities. "I need time," I told her, "but I also need protection. Will you help me document the forgeries? Officially, but quietly?" Aviva nodded, already planning. By evening, she had arranged for a discreet art authentication team from the city to examine my collection. Their report, sealed and notarized, now sat in my lawyer's safe. That had been 3 months ago. 3 months of watching, waiting, collecting evidence. 3 months of pretending I didn't know my own children were systematically stealing from me while I secretly revised my will, established a trust for the genuine artworks we recovered, and prepared for the confrontation that loomed ahead. Then came the diagnosis. Dr. Zephyr Kincaid had been my physician for 20 years. He'd seen me through Alaric's long illness and my subsequent recovery. When the abdominal pain wouldn't subside, when I found myself unable to eat more than a few bites at meals, I knew something was wrong. The tests confirmed what we both suspected. The disease that had taken my mother and her mother before her had found me too. "There are treatments, Eloan," he said, his voice gentle. "Not cures, but they could buy you time." "How much time?" "Without treatment? Perhaps 4 months. With aggressive intervention, possibly 8, even a year. But quality of life considerations—" "I understand," I said, cutting him off. And I did. I'd watched Alaric suffer through treatments that extended his life by precious months, but stole his dignity in the process. I'll need some time to consider my options. What I didn't say was that the diagnosis had clarified my timeline. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Whatever confrontation awaited with my children, it needed to happen soon, while I still had strength and clarity. The changes began subtly after I shared my diagnosis. Suddenly, my children were calling daily, visiting more frequently. Thaddeus offered to review my finances to ensure everything is in order. Imogen suggested I might be more comfortable moving into her guest house where someone could keep an eye on me. Even Reed, my quietest child, nervously proposed that perhaps selling Wisteria Cottage before the market turns might be sensible. Their concern might have touched me if I hadn't caught the calculating gleam in their eyes, the way they assessed the contents of each room during visits, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered. When Thaddeus called to announce the family meeting, I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting it, the inevitable next move in a game they thought they were controlling. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, unusual for Mistral Harbor in autumn. I spent the early hours in my garden, deadheading roses and pulling late-season weeds from between the flagstones. The physical work centered me, preparing me for the confrontation ahead. By noon, I had bathed and dressed in a blue silk dress Alaric had always loved, secured my silver hair in its usual chignon, and applied a touch of lipstick. If this was to be a battle, I would face it with dignity. They arrived together, which immediately confirmed my suspicions. My children rarely coordinated anything unless plotting was involved. Thaddeus led the way, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most Mistral Harbor residents earned in a month. At 49, my eldest had his father's height and coloring, but none of his warmth. Where Alaric's eyes had sparkled. With humor, Thaddeus's remained coolly assessing, calculating returns on emotional investments. Imogen followed, elegant in cream linen, her auburn hair swept into a sophisticated twist. At 46, my daughter had built a reputation as a formidable corporate attorney. I'd always admired her sharp mind, but worried about the hardness that had gradually replaced her childhood compassion. Reed entered last, hesitating at the threshold as if reluctant to fully commit to whatever scheme his siblings had orchestrated. At 43, my youngest still retained a boyish quality, despite the gray threading through his dark hair. His eyes, so like mine, couldn't quite meet my gaze. "Mother," Thaddeus embraced me with practiced affection. "You look well." "Appearances can be deceiving," I replied, kissing his cheek. "Come in. I've prepared lunch." I led them to the sunroom, where I'd set the table with my grandmother's china and crystal. The autumn light streamed through the windows, illuminating the spread of poached salmon, fresh bread, and seasonal vegetables from my garden. "This is lovely, Mother, but you shouldn't have gone to the trouble," Imogen said, taking her usual seat. "We could have brought something." "It's no trouble to feed my children in my own home," I replied, pouring white wine into their glasses. "Besides, cooking focuses my mind." "Speaking of your mind," Thaddeus began, not bothering to wait until we'd finished our meal. "We've been concerned about how you'll manage on your own with this diagnosis." "Have you?" I took a small bite of salmon, savoring its delicate flavor. "How thoughtful." Imogen shot her brother an annoyed glance before turning to me with practiced sympathy. "What Thaddeus means is that we want to help distribute the burden of managing your affairs while you focus on your health." "Distribute the burden," I repeated, setting down my fork. "What an interesting choice of words." Reed shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mother, we're just worried about you." "Are you, Reed?" I asked gently. "Or are you worried about something else? Perhaps the Klimt sketch that used to hang in my bedroom? The one that was replaced with a rather skillful forgery?" The silence that fell over the table was absolute. Thaddeus recovered first, his expression carefully neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about. Perhaps your medication is making me confused?" I finished for him. "That would be convenient, wouldn't it? An addled old woman making wild accusations." I took a sip of water. "Unfortunately for you, I'm not taking any medication that affects my cognitive function. And I had all 7 forgeries professionally authenticated 3 months ago." Imogen's face paled beneath her perfect makeup. 7? Yes, dear. The Klimt, the Morisot, both sergeants, the Cassatt, the Cezanne, and the William Morris sketch. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Reed looked physically ill. Mother, I wanted to tell you. I tried to stop them. But you didn't, I said softly. You knew, and you said nothing. Thaddeus's mask slipped, revealing a flash of anger. This is absurd. We've been managing your affairs because you're clearly not capable. Managing? I interrupted. Is that what you call embezzling from your mother? Because that's what the forensic accountant called it when he examined the discrepancies in data and my financial statements. I reached for the folder beside my plate and opened it, sliding documents across the table. 300,000 from my investment accounts, 200,000 from the property management trust, nearly $1 million misappropriated from the Blackwood Foundation. Imogen's legal training kicked in immediately. These accusations are completely unfounded. We've only ever acted in your best interest. Have you? I asked, my voice remaining measured despite the pain lancing through my heart. Was it in my best interest when you falsified my signature on transfer documents? When you systematically looted the art collection your father spent his lifetime building? When you began dividing my assets among yourselves while I'm still very much alive? Thaddeus's expression hardened. You don't understand the complexities of estate management. We were simply preparing for the inevitable. The inevitable, I repeated. My death, you mean? How convenient that it's now on a predictable timeline. Reed finally found his voice. It wasn't like that. We never wanted— What did you want, Reed? I asked, genuinely curious. What justification did you create that made stealing from your dying mother acceptable? No one answered. Outside, clouds had begun to gather over the harbor, the bright day dimming as if nature itself acknowledged the darkness that had settled over my family. I closed the folder and folded my hands on the table. I've had 3 months to contemplate what to do about this situation. 3 months watching you circle like vultures, waiting for me to decay enough that you could swoop in and take everything without resistance. Mother, please, Imogen began, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. Yesterday I filed criminal charges against all 3 of you. Theft, fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse. Detective Marlowe Voss will be arriving shortly to take your statements. The shock on their faces might have been satisfying under different circumstances. Instead, it only deepened my sadness. You can't be serious, Thaddeus said, his voice hoarse. We're your children. Yes, I agreed, which makes your betrayal all the more painful. This will destroy the family name, Imogen protested. Everything father built. Your father built a legacy of integrity, I cut in sharply. You're the ones who have tarnished it. Reed had begun to weep silently, his shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I said, something in my heart softening toward my youngest. Which is why I've instructed my attorney to offer you immunity in exchange for your testimony against your siblings. Thaddeus stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward. You would turn us against each other? Your own children? You did that yourselves when you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive, I replied, rising to face him. Though he towered over me, I felt no fear. I changed my will 3 months ago. Everything, the house, the art collection, the majority of my assets, will go to the Mistral Harbor Foundation for Arts Education, a foundation that will be overseen by a board that doesn't include any of you. The doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the tension. I checked my watch, precisely on time. That will be Detective Voss, I said. I'll let him in. Wait, Imogen called as I reached the doorway. There must be some way to resolve this privately. Some arrangement. I turned back to look at my children. These strangers I had raised, loved, and now barely recognized. There is one option, I said quietly. Complete restitution. Return every artwork, repay every dollar, resign from your positions at Blackwood Enterprises, and commit to community service for the remainder of my life, however long or short that may be. Do that, and I'll consider withdrawing the charges. You're asking us to give up everything, Thaddeus said incredulously. No, I corrected him. I'm giving you the chance to keep the only thing that truly matters, your integrity. It's more than you offered me. I left them to consider their options as I went to answer the door. Detective Voss waited on the porch, his weathered face solemn beneath salt and pepper hair. Mrs. Blackwood, he nodded respectfully. Are you certain you want to proceed? I glanced back at the sunroom, where my children huddled in tense discussion. Through the windows, I could see Reed gesturing emphatically while Thaddeus and Imogen exchanged sharp words. Yes, I said, stepping aside to let him enter. It's time they learned that some inheritances can't be stolen. They must be earned. As I led the detective toward my fractured family, I felt a curious lightness despite the heaviness of the moment. Whatever time I had left would not be spent in fear or manipulation. I had reclaimed my narrative, even as its pages grew fewer. The roses would bloom again next spring, whether or not I was there to see them. But my legacy, the true one, not of wealth but of principle, would endure in the lessons I taught today, even to children who had forgotten how to listen. Detective Voss sat at my dining table, his weathered hands folded over a leather-bound notebook. The afternoon light had faded to a steely gray as rain began to tap against the windows. My children sat in strained silence, Thaddeus rigid with fury, Imogen coolly assessing her legal options, Reed hunched with the physical manifestation of guilt. Let me be clear about the evidence we've gathered, Voss said, his voice carrying the distinctive accent of someone who'd grown up on Mistral Harbor's docks. We have documentation of unauthorized financial transfers dating back 18 months. We have authentication reports confirming 7 valuable artworks were replaced with forgeries. We have Mrs. Blackwood's testimony, along with sworn statements from her financial advisor and art authentication experts. Imogen leaned forward, attorney mode fully engaged. Detective, these are family matters that have been grossly misrepresented. My brothers and I have been managing our mother's affairs with her best interests at heart. Given my recent diagnosis, you accelerated your timeline, I interrupted. But the theft began long before that. Detective Voss nodded. The evidence supports Mrs. Blackwood's assertion. The first documented forgery replacement occurred 14 months ago, according to the authentication report. Thaddeus's jaw tightened. This is a misunderstanding that's being blown completely, out of proportion. Is it? I asked quietly. Shall we discuss the offshore account you established in the Cayman Islands? The one where you've been transferring funds from my accounts? His eyes widened slightly, the first genuine reaction I'd seen from him. He hadn't expected me to know about that. How did you? Your father taught me to always understand my finances, Thaddeus. Just because I allowed you to manage some aspects of my estate didn't mean I stopped paying attention. Reed looked up, his face ashen. I told you she would find out. I told you both this was wrong. Shut up, Reed, Imogen hissed. Detective Voss made a note in his book. Mr. Blackwood, if you'd like to make a formal statement separate from your siblings, we can arrange that. Before Reed could respond, Imogen cut in. No one is making any statements. We're calling our attorneys first. That's your right, Voss acknowledged. But given the evidence, I'm obligated to inform you that all 3 of you are facing serious charges. Mrs. Blackwood has indicated a willingness to discuss alternative arrangements, but those discussions would need to happen soon. Thaddeus stood abruptly. We need to confer privately. I nodded. Use the library. Detective Voss and I will wait here. When they had left the room, Voss turned to me. Are you certain about offering them an alternative? The evidence supports prosecution. I gazed out at the rain now falling steadily over the harbor, silvering the water's surface. They're still my children. Even after what they've done? Especially after what they've done. I turned back to him. They need to understand consequences, detective. Real ones. But I don't need to see them in prison to achieve that. He studied me for a long moment. You're an unusual woman, Mrs. Blackwood. I've had an unusual life. And now, a very definitive endpoint to consider. I poured us both tea from the pot that had gone cold during the confrontation. When you know exactly how little time you have left, you become very clear about what matters. In the library, I could hear raised voices, Thaddeus's angry baritone, Imogen's clipped legal arguments, Reed's pleading tenor, the family tapestry unraveling thread by thread. After 20 minutes, they returned. Reed's eyes were red-rimmed, Imogen's mouth set in a tight line. Thaddeus, surprisingly, looked defeated. "We're prepared to discuss restitution," he said stiffly. I nodded. "Detective, would you excuse us? I believe this has become a family matter again." Voss hesitated. "Are you sure that's wise, Mrs. Blackwood?" "No," I admitted with a small smile. "But it's necessary." After the detective departed with a promise to return the following day, I faced my children across the dining table. The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm that filled the silence between us. "Your terms?" Thaddeus said flatly. I took a deep breath. "Complete financial restitution. Every dollar returned to my accounts and the foundation. All artwork returned or recovered at your expense. Your immediate resignations from Blackwood Enterprises and the Foundation Board. And 2 years of community service. Real service, not some token board position." "You're destroying everything Father built," Imogen protested. "No," I corrected her. "Your father built a company on integrity and community investment. You're the ones who have corrupted that legacy. The company will continue under new leadership." "And if we refuse?" Thaddeus challenged. "Then Detective Voss returns tomorrow with arrest warrants. The evidence goes public. The Blackwood name becomes associated not with philanthropy and business acumen, but with elder abuse and fraud." I met each of their eyes in turn. "Is that what you want?" Reed spoke first. "I'll do it. Whatever you ask. I'll sign whatever you need." Imogen shot him a venomous look. "You always were weak." "No," I said sharply. "Recognizing wrongdoing and accepting consequences isn't weakness, Imogen. It's the first step toward redemption." Thaddeus laughed bitterly. "Redemption? You're talking as if we've committed some terrible crime. We were protecting our inheritance." "From whom?" I demanded, my composure finally cracking. "From me? The mother who raised you? Who supported every ambition, celebrated every success, comforted every failure? Who gave you every advantage?" I leaned forward, my voice quiet but intense. "I would have given you everything freely. All you had to do was wait. Instead, you decided to lie, to manipulate a dying woman." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Reed's stifled sob. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide," I said, rising from the table. "I'm tired now. Detective Voss will return at 10. Either have your signed agreements ready or prepare for the consequences." I left them sitting in my dining room, 3 strangers with my blood in their veins, but apparently none of my values. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, exhaustion washed over me. Not just physical fatigue from the cancer slowly consuming me from within, but a bone-deep weariness of spirit. In my room, I locked the door behind me and sank onto the edge of my bed. Only then did I allow the tears to come, silent and burning. I wept not for myself, but for the children I had lost long before any diagnosis, lost to greed, to entitlement, to the corrosive belief that wealth was more important than integrity. When had it happened? Was it something Alaric and I had done? Some lesson we failed to teach? Some value we neglected to instill? Or was it the gradual erosion that wealth sometimes brings, wearing away compassion and gratitude until only acquisition remains? I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the tears subsided. I moved to the window seat that overlooked the harbor, watching the rain blur the lights of the fishing boats into watery stars. The same view that had comforted me through Alaric's illness now offered solace again. A soft knock at the door startled me. "Mother?" Reed's voice, hesitant and raw. "May I speak with you?" I considered refusing, but something in his tone, vulnerability I hadn't heard in years, compelled me to unlock the door. He stood in the hallway, his tall frame somehow diminished. In that moment, he looked more like the sensitive boy who had followed me through the garden naming flowers than the man who had helped betray me. "They've gone," he said. "Back to their hotels to consult their lawyers." He hesitated. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, allowing him into the sanctuary of my bedroom. He glanced at the wall where the Klimt forgery hung. "I told them it was wrong," he said quietly. "From the beginning. But I didn't stop them. I didn't tell you. That makes me just as guilty." "Why, Reed?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. "Why would you do this?" He sank into the window seat, shoulders hunched. "It started small. Thaddeus convinced us you were making poor financial decisions. He showed us statements, projections, claiming you were spending recklessly, that there would be nothing left." He looked up, his eyes pained. I should have verified his claims, but I didn't. Then the art began disappearing. Just one piece at first, then another. By the time I realized how extensive it was, I was already implicated. "You could have come to me," I said, sitting beside him. "At any point." "I was afraid," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Afraid of Thaddeus, of losing my position, of your disappointment, and then your diagnosis." He trailed off, unable to continue. "Made everything more urgent," I finished for him. "Suddenly there was a timeline for your inheritance." He nodded miserably. "I've signed the restitution agreement. I've already instructed my attorney to begin transferring everything back. The cassette forgery was my responsibility. I'll have the original returned from the storage facility tomorrow." I studied my youngest child. This man I'd once known so well and now hardly recognized. "Why are you telling me this tonight, instead of waiting for morning?" "Because I need you to know that I understand what we've done. What I've done." He met my eyes directly for the first time. "And because I'm not doing this to avoid prosecution. I'm doing it because it's right. Because I want to try to be the son you deserve, even if it's too late." Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. "It's never too late to choose a better path, Reed." "Even now? With everything that's happened?" I thought of the oncology report on my desk, the declining numbers, the ticking clock. Especially now. Time has become my most precious resource. I don't want to waste what remains on anger and retribution. He reached for my hand tentatively. When I didn't pull away, he grasped it in both of his. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Perhaps not," I acknowledged. "But you might earn it with time and genuine effort." "Thaddeus and Imogen won't sign," he said after a moment. "They're convinced they can fight this, that your illness will prevent effective testimony, that their lawyers can tie everything up until—" He stopped, unable to speak the truth we both knew. "Until I died." "I suspected as much," I said. "They always were the strategists of the family." "What will you do?" I gazed out at the harbor, at the rain that had finally begun to ease. "What I must. Sometimes love means setting boundaries, even painful ones." Reed stayed a while longer. We didn't speak much, but the silence between us was no longer charged with deception. When he finally rose to leave, he paused at the door. I'll be back tomorrow. Whatever happens with Thaddeus and Imogen, I'll stand with you. After he left, I sat in the darkness for a long time, watching the clouds part to reveal a sliver of moon over the water. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn sounded, a low, mournful note that seemed to echo the ache in my heart. Morning. Arrived with surprising clarity, the storm having washed the air clean. I dressed carefully in a sage-green dress that Alaric had always said brought out the silver in my eyes, arranged my hair, and applied a touch of lipstick. Armor of a sort. Aviva arrived first, her presence a silent support as we waited in the sunroom. The light played across the polished wood of the table where I had laid out the restitution agreements my lawyer had prepared overnight. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, adjusting the crystal vase of fresh-cut roses I'd placed as a centerpiece. "No one would blame you for pressing charges, regardless of whether they sign." "I'm certain," I replied. "This isn't about punishment, Aviva. It's about restoration, of values, of truth, of the legacy Alaric and I tried to build." Detective Voss arrived precisely at 10, his expression professionally neutral as he greeted us. "Mrs. Blackwood, Ms. Thornfield." "They're not here yet," I said, gesturing to the empty chairs, though Reed texted to say he's on his way. As if summoned by his name, the front door opened, and Reed entered carrying a carefully wrapped package that I recognized immediately as the stolen cassette. He placed it gently on the sideboard before taking a seat beside me. "Thaddeus and Imogen?" Voss asked. Reed shook his head. "They've engaged Harrington and Walsh, the most aggressive litigation firm in the region, known for their scorched earth approach." Detective Voss's expression darkened. "Then I should inform you that I have warrants ready to be executed. They can come in voluntarily, or we can proceed with formal arrests." The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime incongruous with the tension in the room. Aviva went to answer it, returning moments later with Thaddeus and Imogen, followed by a sharp-featured woman in an immaculate suit whom I recognized as Victoria Harrington, founding partner of their firm. "Mrs. Blackwood," Harrington began without preamble. "My clients are prepared to discuss a family resolution to these unfortunate misunderstandings, but I must insist that Detective Voss leave the premises. This is a private matter." "No," I said simply. "It ceased to be a private matter when my children committed criminal acts. Detective Voss stays. Then we have nothing to discuss." She turned to leave, gesturing for Thaddeus and Imogen to follow. "If you walk out that door," I called after them, "the next time we meet will be in court. The evidence will become public record. Everything. The theft, the fraud, the forgeries. The Blackwood name will be dragged through every newspaper from here to New York." Harrington paused, turning back with a calculated smile. "Mrs. Blackwood, given your condition, any prosecution would face significant challenges. Testimony from someone on strong medications with potential cognitive impairment." "My cognitive function is perfectly intact," I interrupted, "as my doctor will testify. Moreover, the financial evidence and authentication reports don't require my testimony at all. Records can be challenged," Harrington countered. "Expert witnesses contradicted. Litigation could extend for years." "Years I don't have," I acknowledged, "but the Mistral Harbor Trust for Arts Education, the entity to which I've bequeathed. My estate has very deep pockets and a board committed to seeing this through, long after I'm gone." Thaddeus and Imogen exchanged glances. Something in their calculation had shifted. "What exactly are you proposing?" Imogen asked, speaking for the first time. I gestured to the documents on the table. "The same terms I outlined yesterday. Complete financial restitution, return of all artworks, resignation from company positions, community service." "That's outrageous," Thaddeus snapped. "You're asking us to give up everything." "No," Reed said quietly. "She's asking us to give back what was never ours to take." Harrington placed a restraining hand on Thaddeus's arm. Perhaps we should review the specifics of these agreements before making any decisions. I nodded. Of course, but be aware that this offer expires when you leave this room. After that, Detective Voss will proceed as the law requires. For the next 2 hours, the sunroom became a battlefield of legal terms, financial details, and careful negotiations. Harrington argued each point with precision, while Voss maintained a watchful presence, occasionally clarifying the legal alternatives to signing. Throughout it all, I remained calm, refusing to be provoked by Thaddeus's barely contained fury or Imogen's cold calculation. Aviva stayed beside me, a steady presence as the morning stretched into afternoon. Finally, when the shadows had begun to lengthen across the polished floor, Harrington set down her pen. My clients are prepared to sign with the negotiated modifications. The modifications were minor: adjustments to the community service, requirements, clarification on resignation timelines, specifics about artwork authentication procedures. The core requirements remained intact. One by one, they signed. Reed first, his signature quick and decisive. Imogen next, her pen strokes precise as a scalpel. Thaddeus last, his hand bearing down so hard the paper nearly tore. When it was done, Detective Voss gathered the documents, nodding to me. I'll file these with the DA's office. If the restitution proceeds as agreed, no charges will be filed. Thank you, Detective, I said, rising to show him out. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, Mrs. Blackwood, I think you've shown extraordinary grace. Many in your position would have chosen differently. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But vengeance has never healed anything. When I returned to the sunroom, Harrington was gathering her briefcase to leave. My children sat in strained silence, the afternoon light casting long shadows across their faces. The first restitution transfers should be complete by tomorrow, Harrington said briskly. The artwork will require more time to recover from various storage facilities and buyers. I understand, I replied. Detective Voss will monitor the progress. After she departed, the four of us remained, a fractured family portrait. What happens now? Imogen asked, her composure finally showing cracks. Now you honor your agreements, I said simply. You make restitution. You resign. Your positions, you begin your community service. And us? Thaddeus gestured vaguely between us. This family? I studied him, my firstborn, who had his father's bearing but none of his heart. That depends on you, on all of you. Rebuilding trust requires more than signed documents. It requires genuine remorse, consistent action, and time. Time you don't have, he said bluntly. Thaddeus! Reed hissed, appalled. I held up my hand. No, he's right to name it. My time is limited, which means you have limited opportunity to begin making amends. What you do with that opportunity is your choice. Imogen stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I should go. I need to inform the board of my resignation. Yes, I agreed. You should. Thaddeus rose as well, his expression unreadable. This isn't over. It is, I corrected him gently. The only question is what comes next. They left without embracing me, without the customary kisses on the cheek that had become as meaningless as their professed concern. Only Reed remained, his presence a question mark in the emptying room. Will you stay for dinner? I asked him. He looked surprised. You'd want that? You've taken the first step, Reed. That matters. I moved to the kitchen, my steps measured against the growing fatigue. Besides, I've made far too much fish stew for one person. That evening, as darkness fell over Mistral Harbor, Reed and I ate together in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room. The conversation was halting at first, weighted with all that had happened, but gradually eased into something approaching normal. When he helped me clear the dishes, his movements were careful, deliberate, as if handling fragile treasures rather than everyday china. You don't need to treat me like I'll break, I told him. The diagnosis doesn't change who I am. He set down the plate he was drying, his expression serious. I know who you are, Mother. That's what makes what we did so unforgivable. You've always been the strongest, most principled person I know. Even when Father died, you never broke. I broke, I corrected him. Just not where anyone could see. His eyes widened slightly. At this admission. Strength isn't about never breaking, Reed. It's about how you put yourself back together. I handed him another dish. And forgiveness isn't something you earn like a prize. It's a process, a daily choice. Later, as he prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. May I come back tomorrow? There's a matter at the company I could use your advice on. How to handle the transition. I nodded, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. I'd like that. After he left, I moved through the quiet house, turning off lights, checking locks, the habits of a lifetime. In the study, I paused before the portrait of Alaric that hung above the fireplace. His eyes, so like Thaddeus's in color, but so different in expression, seemed to follow me with familiar warmth. What would you have done? I asked the empty room, my voice soft in the darkness. Would you have forgiven them so readily? The portrait offered no answer, but I could almost hear his voice, the gentle rumble that had been my compass for 40 years. You always did see the path to healing more clearly than I did, Elowen. Trust your heart. In my bedroom, I opened the leather journal and made a new entry, documenting the day's events with the same careful attention I'd given to recording the evidence of my children's betrayal. But this time I added something more. My hopes for what might still be salvaged. My prayers for healing that might extend beyond my limited time. The path forward was uncertain. Thaddeus and Imogen might never truly reconcile with me before the end. Reed's redemption had only just begun. The family Alaric and I had built might never fully recover from this fracture. But as I closed the journal and prepared for sleep, I felt a curious peace settle over me. I had done what needed to be done, not in anger or vengeance, but in the hope that truth might eventually lead to reconciliation. Whether I lived to see that reconciliation was less important than knowing I had created the possibility for it. Outside my window, the lighthouse at the harbor's edge swept its beam across the dark water, a rhythm as steady and reassuring as the beating of my heart. For now, that was enough. For now, I was still here, still Elowen Blackwood, still the keeper of my own story, and tomorrow would bring what it would bring. I woke before dawn, the pain more insistent than usual. Dr. Kincaid had left me prescriptions for stronger medications, but I'd been reluctant to take them, preferring clarity of mind over comfort of body. This morning, however, I reached for the orange bottle on my nightstand, measuring out the smallest effective dose. Some battles weren't worth fighting. As the medication gradually dulled the sharp edges of my discomfort, I watched the first, tentative rays of sunlight filter through the mist that clung to Mistral Harbor. The fishing boats were already moving out, their running lights creating constellations on the dark water. I'd always loved this hour, the world suspended between night and day, holding its breath before the rush of morning. The revelations and confrontations of yesterday had left me drained, but also unexpectedly unburdened. The truth, painful as it was, had finally been spoken aloud. The silent knowledge I'd carried for months had been transferred from my shoulders to where it properly belonged with my children. I dressed slowly, choosing a soft cashmere sweater the color of sea glass against the growing autumn chill. My movements were more deliberate these days, not just from pain but from a desire to fully inhabit each moment. When your future contracts to a matter of months, you develop a different relationship with time. Downstairs, I found Aviva already in the kitchen, measuring coffee grounds into the French press. She looked up when I entered, her shrewd eyes assessing. "You slept," she observed, sounding mildly surprised. Better than I have in weeks, I admitted, settling at the breakfast nook. She nodded, satisfied. Telling the truth will do that. Aviva had been staying in my guest room since the diagnosis, coming and going as her own schedule allowed, but providing a steady presence during this tumultuous time. In 50 years of friendship, we'd developed the comfortable rhythms of people who no longer needed to explain themselves to each other. "Reed is coming by this morning," I told her as she placed a mug of coffee before me. "He wants advice about the company transition." Aviva's eyebrows rose slightly. "That was quick. Do you trust it?" I considered her question carefully. "I trust that he feels genuine remorse. Whether that translates into lasting change." I shrugged. "Time will tell." "Time you don't have much of," she pointed out. Her bluntness one of the qualities I'd always valued in her. "Perhaps not, but I have enough to begin the process." I sipped my coffee, savoring its rich bitterness. "And in the meantime, we have more pressing matters to address. The Foundation Board meets tomorrow, and they'll need to be informed about the changes." The Blackwood Foundation for Arts Education had been Alaric's passion project, established 30 years ago to provide artistic opportunities for Mistral Harbor's underprivileged youth. Over the decades, it had grown to encompass scholarships, community programs, and a small but excellent gallery downtown. With Thaddeus and Imogen resigning from the board, new leadership would need to be established quickly. "I've been thinking about that," Aviva said, sliding a folder across the table. "These are my recommendations for new board members. People with the right combination of financial acumen, artistic understanding, and ethical backbone." I opened the folder, scanning the list of names. Most were familiar, respected members of the community who had demonstrated commitment to the Foundation's mission over the years. One name, however, caught me by surprise. "Reed?" I looked up at Aviva. "You're suggesting keeping him on the board?" She shrugged, her silver hair catching the morning light. "He's shown remorse. He's making restitution. And unlike his siblings, he actually cares about the Foundation's mission, not just its prestige." "It's a risk," I mused. "Life is risk, Elowen. Besides, keeping him engaged gives him a chance to rebuild, not just his relationship with you, but his own integrity." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Aviva rose to answer it, returning moments later with Reed. He carried a leather portfolio and a white bakery box that filled the kitchen with the scent of cinnamon. "Pastries from Harborside. Bakery," he said, setting the box on the counter. "I remember you always liked their morning buns." Such a small gesture, yet it caught me off guard. This evidence that he still remembered my preferences, still cared enough to act on that knowledge. "Thank you," I said simply. "Coffee?" We settled around the kitchen table, the three of us forming a tentative truce as Reed opened his portfolio and began outlining the situation at Blackwood Enterprises. "Thaddeus called an emergency board meeting last night. He's presenting the resignations as a strategic restructuring rather than admitting the truth." Reed spread several documents before me. "These are the current board members, company bylaws regarding succession, and financial projections for the next quarter." I studied the papers, noting the familiar names. Most of the board had been appointed during Alaric's time, with a few newer additions championed by Thaddeus. "The critical question," Reed continued, "is whether to disclose the real reason for the resignations. If we don't, we're perpetuating a lie. If we do, the company's reputation could suffer," I finished. "For him, precisely." I considered the dilemma, weighing truth against practicality. The company employed over 200 people in Mistral Harbor, their livelihoods intertwined with its success. "We tell a version of the truth," I decided finally. "Not the full lie. Details, those remain private as part of our agreement, but enough that there's no deception. Financial irregularities were discovered, An internal investigation was conducted, and the responsible parties have resigned and made restitution. Reed nodded slowly. Clean, factual, and preserves the company's integrity without unnecessarily damaging its reputation. Or exposing your siblings to public humiliation, Aviva added pointedly. That too, I acknowledged. The punishment should fit the crime, but it needn't extend beyond it. Reed made notes in precise handwriting that reminded me painfully of Alaric's. What about leadership succession? The bylaws give you controlling interest, Mother, but day-to-day operations need someone with knowledge of the business and unimpeachable integrity, I finished. I studied my youngest child, seeing both his potential and his flaws clearly. It can't be you, Reed. Not yet. You're still making amends. Though he tried to hide it, I saw the flash of disappointment cross his face. I understand, he said, quietly. For now, I'm appointing Ellis Montgomery as interim CEO, I continued. Ellis had been Alaric's right-hand man for 20 years before retiring 5 years ago. He knows the company inside and out, and his reputation is beyond reproach. Ellis is 73, Reed pointed out. And sharp as ever, I countered. He'll stabilize the company and give us time to identify permanent leadership. I met Reed's eyes directly. This doesn't mean you can't earn your way back, but trust must be rebuilt step by step. He nodded, accepting the decision with more grace than I'd expected. I'll contact Ellis today, and I've already drafted my formal resignation from the foundation board. I exchanged a glance with Aviva, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. About that, I said, I'd like you to remain on the foundation board, under supervision. Consider it part of your community service, and a chance to demonstrate your commitment to redemption. Reed looked stunned. You'd still trust me with that responsibility? After everything? Trust is earned, I reminded him. Consider this, an opportunity to begin earning it back. After Reed left, promising to return with updates after speaking with Ellis, Aviva and I walked in the garden. The October air held the crisp promise of winter, but the late roses still bloomed defiantly along the stone path. You're giving him a chance his siblings won't get, Aviva observed as we paused by the small reflecting pool Alaric had installed for our 30th anniversary. Reed chose a different path yesterday, I replied, watching a fallen leaf drift across the water's surface. He chose truth over self-protection. That deserves acknowledgement. And Thaddeus and Imogen? I sighed, feeling the weight of maternal grief press against my chest. They made their choices too. If they demonstrate genuine change, they'll find doors opening for them as well. But I won't hold my breath waiting for that transformation. Nor should you, Aviva agreed, her tone softening. You've been extraordinarily fair, Elowen, more fair than many would be in your position. We continued our slow circuit of the garden, pausing occasionally for me to rest on one of the stone benches placed strategically along the path. My stamina was declining more rapidly than I cared to admit, each day bringing new limitations. Have you decided about treatment? Aviva asked as we returned to the house, her question voicing the concern she'd been carefully avoiding. I removed my gardening gloves, considering my answer. Dr. Kincaid is coming this afternoon to discuss options, but I'm leaning toward palliative care rather than aggressive treatment. Aviva nodded, her expression carefully neutral. Quality over quantity. Exactly. I smiled at my oldest friend, grateful that she, at least, understood without explanation. I've watched too many people spend their final months in misery for the sake of a few extra weeks. I'd rather have less time fully present than more time lost in a fog of medication and suffering. Later that afternoon, Dr. Kincaid arrived with his leather medical bag and gentle demeanor. We sat in my study, surrounded by the books and mementos of a lifetime, as he outlined my options in clear, compassionate terms. The standard protocol would be aggressive chemotherapy combined with radiation, he explained. In some cases, this approach has extended life by 6 to 12 months. However, the side effects are considerable and would significantly impact your quality of life. And the alternative? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Palliative care focused on pain management and comfort. This wouldn't extend your life, but it would allow you to remain relatively comfortable and clear-headed until near the end. I considered these options, though in truth, I had made my decision weeks ago when the first test results confirmed my suspicions. I choose palliative care, I said firmly. I'd rather have 3 good months than 6 miserable ones. Dr. Kincaid nodded, unsurprised. I thought that might be your choice. We'll set up a care plan that maximizes your comfort and independence for as long as possible. As we finalized the details, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Having made this decision, having chosen the manner of my remaining time, I felt more in control than I had since receiving the diagnosis. There's one more thing, I said as Dr. Kincaid prepared to leave. I'd like your help organizing my medical directives and end-of-life plan. I want everything clearly documented to prevent any confusion later. He understood immediately what I was asking. With my children's recent behavior, I couldn't risk leaving any aspect of my final care to chance or conflicting interpretations. Of course, he agreed. I'll have the hospital's patient advocate contact you. They specialize in these matters and can ensure everything is properly documented and legally binding. After he left, I returned to the study, where Aviva was organizing papers for the foundation meeting. I've made my decision, I told her simply. She looked up, her eyes reflecting understanding. Palliative care? I nodded. Good, she said. That sounds like you, practical, dignified, and on your own terms. I smiled, grateful yet again for her straightforward acceptance. Now we need to prepare for tomorrow's foundation meeting. I want to announce the new board composition and outline our expanded mission. For the next several hours, we worked side by side, restructuring the foundation that would become my primary legacy. Under the new plan, the foundation's scope would expand to include not just arts education, but also elder care advocacy and financial literacy programs, addressing both the passions Alaric and I had shared and the issues that my recent experiences had highlighted. As evening approached, bringing with it the golden light that made Mistral Harbor famous among painters, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Imogen's number, the first contact from her since yesterday's confrontations. Should I give you privacy? Aviva asked, gathering her papers. I considered for a moment, then shook my head. No need. This won't take long. I answered the call, keeping my voice neutral. Hello, Imogen. Mother. Her tone was clipped, professional, her attorney voice. I've submitted my resignation to the board as agreed. The financial restitution will be completed by end of business tomorrow. Thank you for informing me, I replied, matching her formality. A pause stretched between us, filled with all the things neither of us were saying. Is that all? I finally asked. Another pause, then. I've been advised not to discuss anything further without counsel present. I see. The disappointment shouldn't have stung, but it did. Then I won't keep you. Wait. Her voice softened almost imperceptibly. More so, it's being returned tomorrow. I wanted you to know. The painting Alaric had given me on our wedding day. The one they had replaced with a forgery over a year ago. I appreciate that, I said, uncertain whether this represented a genuine olive branch or merely compliance with our agreement. Goodbye, Mother. She ended the call before I could respond. I set the phone down slowly, aware of Aviva watching me with concern. Imogen? She guessed. Yes, informing me of her compliance with the agreement. I tried to keep the sadness from my voice but knew I hadn't succeeded. Formal, Aviva observed. Very. Give her time, Elowen. This is all still fresh. Shock and shame can look like anger. Time, I repeated with a rueful smile. The one thing I can't give. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as we prepared for the Foundation board meeting. I dressed with particular care, choosing a deep burgundy suit that Alaric had always admired, securing my silver hair in its usual chignon, applying just enough makeup to add color to my increasingly pallid complexion. You look magnificent, Aviva declared when I descended the stairs, like a queen ready to address her court. I laughed softly. Hardly a queen, just an old woman with one last mission. Never just anything, she corrected, handing me my portfolio of documents for the meeting. Ready? The Blackwood Foundation headquarters occupied a renovated Victorian building overlooking the harbor, its tall windows and polished woodwork creating an atmosphere of timeless elegance. As Aviva and I entered the boardroom, conversations hushed, all eyes turning toward me. The current board members rose respectfully, 6 men and women who had served the Foundation with varying degrees of dedication over the years. Reed sat. Among them, his expression carefully neutral. 2 empty chairs marked the absence of Thaddeus and Imogen. Good morning, I greeted them, taking my place at the head of the table. Thank you all for attending this special session. We have significant changes to discuss. Over the next hour, I outlined the restructuring of the board, the expansion of the Foundation's mission, and, without specifics, the financial irregularities that had necessitated these changes. I introduced the 4 new board members Aviva and I had selected, each bringing unique expertise and unimpeachable integrity to the Foundation. Throughout my presentation, I watched the faces around the table. Shock, confusion, and gradually, understanding. Reed kept his eyes lowered, accepting the veiled references to mismanagement with quiet dignity. Questions? I asked when I had finished. Martin Whitaker, a retired judge who had served on the board since Alaric's time, spoke first. These changes are substantial, Elowen. While I don't doubt your judgment, I'm concerned about the timing, given your health situation. I nodded, appreciating his directness. My diagnosis has certainly accelerated my timeline, Martin, but these changes aren't reactive. They're the result of careful consideration and planning. The Foundation's mission has always been to invest in this community's future. These adjustments will ensure that mission continues long after I'm gone. And the leadership transition? Asked Catherine Torres, the board's financial advisor. With Thaddeus and Imogen stepping down, and you. She hesitated delicately. Dying? I supplied with a small smile. You can say it, Catherine. I'm not afraid of the word. An uncomfortable ripple moved around the table. Death, even when imminent, remained the ultimate conversational taboo. Yes, she continued, flushing slightly. With those factors, how will continuity be maintained? I'm appointing Aviva Thornfield as executive director, effective immediately, I announced. Her experience as museum curator gives her unparalleled knowledge of arts programming, and her lifetime in Mistral Harbor ensures she understands our community's needs. Aviva, seated to my right, inclined her head in acknowledgement of the appointment we had discussed months earlier. Additionally, I continued, the new governance structure includes 3-year term limits and mandatory rotation of leadership positions. No single person, including me, should have indefinite control over the Foundation's direction. The meeting continued with discussion of specific programs, budget allocations, and implementation timelines. Throughout, I remained engaged but increasingly aware of my body's limitations, the energy required to maintain my focus draining me more quickly than it once had. When we finally adjourned 2 hours later, I remained seated as the others gathered their materials and departed, offering congratulations to the new appointees and respectful farewells to me. Reed lingered until the room had emptied except for Aviva and myself. You've been planning this for months, he said, not quite a question. Yes, I saw no reason to deny it. Since I first discovered the financial discrepancies. Before your diagnosis? Before I knew it was cancer, I clarified. But I suspected something was wrong with my health. The timing was fortuitous, in a way. It forced me to accelerate plans I might otherwise have delayed. Reed nodded slowly, processing this information. The foundation will be stronger for these changes, more transparent, more accountable. That was the intention, I agreed. He hesitated, then asked the question I could see had been bothering him throughout the meeting. Why did you keep me on the board? The real reason. I studied my youngest child, seeing both the boy he had been and the man he was still becoming. Because everyone deserves the chance to rebuild what they've broken, Reed. Even you. Especially you. Even Thaddeus and Imogen? He asked quietly. If they choose that path, yes. The door remains open. Whether they walk through it is their decision. As Aviva helped me gather my papers, Reed stepped forward hesitantly. May I drive you home? I'd like to continue our conversation, if you feel up to it. I considered his offer, weighing my fatigue against the opportunity this represented. Yes, I decided. That would be fine. The drive back to Wisteria Cottage took only 10 minutes, but it marked the first time Reed and I had been truly alone since the confrontation. As he navigated the familiar streets of Mistral Harbor, I gazed out at the town Alaric and I had called home for over 4 decades. I'm stepping down as head of the technology division, Reed said as we turned onto Ocean View Drive. Not just because of our agreement, but because it's the right thing to do. I've recommended Maya Chen as my replacement. I nodded approvingly. Maya was brilliant, ethical, and had been overlooked for advancement too many times under Thaddeus's leadership. A wise choice, I said. She'll excel in the role. I've also enrolled in a financial ethics course at the community college, he continued. And I've been in touch with the senior center about volunteer opportunities. His earnestness both moved and saddened me. He was trying so hard, so late. Those are positive steps, Reed. As we pulled into my driveway, he turned to face me fully for the first time. I know I can't fix this, Mother. I know I can't undo what's been done or give you back the time we've wasted with deception. But I want you to know I'm trying to be the son you deserve, even in the time we have left. The echo of his words from our earlier conversation struck me deeply. I believe you are, I said softly. And that matters more than you know. Inside, as Reed prepared tea in the kitchen, another small gesture of caretaking, I settled in my favorite chair by the bay window, watching the afternoon light play across the harbor waters. The foundation meeting had drained me more than I cared to admit, the pain in my abdomen asserting itself with increasing insistence. Reed returned with a tray, setting it carefully on the coffee table before taking the seat opposite me. You're in pain, he observed, his voice gentle. Yes, I acknowledged. No point in denial. The evidence was written in the tightness around my eyes, the careful way I held myself. Is there anything I can do? I smiled slightly at the question. So simple, yet reflecting the fundamental shift in our relationship. A week ago, he wouldn't have noticed my discomfort, let alone offered assistance. Just sit with me for a while, I said. Tell me about your life, not the parts I already know, but the things you haven't shared. Your hopes, your regrets, your questions. For the next hour, as the tea grew cold and the afternoon light softened toward evening, Reed opened up in ways he hadn't since childhood. He spoke of his failed marriage 5 years earlier, his growing disillusionment with the corporate world, his private passion for landscape photography that he'd pursued in solitary pre-dawn excursions to the coastline. I listened, asking occasional questions but mainly absorbing this gift, the gift of genuine connection with my child, however belated. When he finally rose to leave, promising to return the following day, I felt a bittersweet mixture of gratitude and regret. Grateful for this reconciliation, regretful that it had taken my impending death to make it possible. After he left, I remained by the window, watching the first stars appear over Mistral Harbor. The day's events had confirmed what I had long suspected, that true legacy wasn't measured in assets or artworks, but in values transmitted, in seeds planted that might bloom long after the gardener was gone. My body was failing, but my purpose had never been clearer. In the time remaining, I would continue the work of restoration, of the foundation, of family bonds where possible, of the values Alaric and I had tried to instill. Not all of these efforts would succeed. Thaddeus and Imogen might never truly reconcile with me before the end, but the attempt itself had value. As night fell completely over the harbor, I finally rose and made my way upstairs, each step requiring more effort than it had even a week ago. In my bedroom, I paused before the space where the Klimt forgery had hung, now empty awaiting the return of the original. Tomorrow, Imogen had said. One small piece of restoration. I opened my journal and recorded the day's events with the same care I'd given to each entry over the years. When I finished, I added a new section titled Legacy Intentions. Not a legal document, but a personal one. A record of my hopes for what might endure after I was gone. As I wrote, the lighthouse beam swept rhythmically across the dark harbor waters, a steadfast presence in the night. I found comfort in its constancy, in the knowledge that it would continue its vigilant rotation long after I had witnessed my final sunrise over Mistral Harbor. Some lights, once kindled, burn on without us. The courier arrived precisely at 9. The next morning, bearing a rectangular package wrapped in protective material and secured with more care than most people give to their firstborn children. I was in the garden when Aviva came to find me, her expression brightening as she announced, "The Morisot has returned." Something tightened in my chest. Not pain, but a complex emotion I couldn't immediately name. I set down my pruning shears and pulled off my gardening gloves, taking a moment to collect myself before following Aviva inside. The package rested on the dining room table, awaiting my attention like a letter containing news too important to rush. Aviva hovered nearby, her fingers twitching with the professional curator's instinct to handle the unwrapping herself. "Would you like to do the honors?" I asked her, recognizing her expertise. She shook her head. "It's your painting, Elowen, your wedding gift." She understood the significance beyond its monetary value. With careful movements, I began removing the layers of protection. First the outer wrapping, then the bubble packaging, and finally the acid-free paper that covered the painting itself. When I lifted the last layer, the familiar image emerged. A woman reading in a garden, her face serene in profile, dappled light filtering through leaves to create patterns across her book and lap. "Beautiful," Aviva murmured, leaning closer to examine the brushwork, "and definitely authentic." I nodded, unable to speak past the sudden constriction in my throat. Alaric had given me this painting on our wedding day, not because it was valuable, though even then it had been, but because he said it reminded him of me. "You have that same quality," he'd told me, his voice low and intimate. "That complete absorption in whatever captures your attention. It's what I first fell in love with." Now, 49 years later, the painting had returned, completing a strange circle. Stolen by my children, recovered through confrontation, restored to its rightful place. A metaphor too obvious to ignore. "Where shall we hang it?" Aviva asked gently, recognizing my emotional state. I considered the question. Its original place had been in the bedroom, but that space now felt tainted by the memory of its theft and replacement with a forgery. "The morning room," I decided, "where I can see it while I have my tea." As Aviva helped me carry the painting to its new location, the doorbell rang. Through the beveled glass panels, I could make out a familiar silhouette. Tall, straight-shouldered, unmistakable. "Thaddeus," I said quietly, my pulse quickening despite my resolve to remain calm. Aviva's expression hardened. "Do you want me to send him away?" I shook my head. "No. Let's hear what he has to say." When I opened the door, my eldest son stood rigidly on the porch, his expression carefully neutral. He wore a suit as expensive and impeccable as always, but something about him seemed diminished, not physically, but in the indefinable aura of authority he had cultivated for decades. "Mother," he said formally, "may I come in?" I stepped aside silently, allowing him to enter. Aviva positioned herself in the doorway to the living room, making it clear she had no intention of leaving us alone. "The Morisot has been delivered," Thaddeus stated, as if reporting a business transaction. "Yes," I confirmed. "Just now." He nodded once, his gaze flicking to the painting Aviva and I had set on a side table. "The others will be returned by the end of the week. The Klimt has been more challenging to recover. The buyer is resistant." "I see." I gestured towards the living room. "Would you like to sit?" He hesitated, then gave another curt nod. We moved into the living room, Thaddeus choosing the most formal chair while I settled on the sofa. Aviva remained standing, a silent sentinel by the doorway. "I've completed the financial restitution, as agreed," he continued in the same detached tone. "The foundation accounts have been fully restored, and the personal transfers to your accounts should appear by close of business today." "Thank you for fulfilling your obligations," I replied, matching his formality. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Is that what you see this as? Mere obligation?" "What would you prefer I call it, Thaddeus? Generosity? Kindness? Those terms hardly apply when returning stolen property." His eyes flashed with a familiar anger. "You've destroyed everything I've built. My position, my reputation, my future with the company. Was that your goal? Complete annihilation?" I studied my firstborn, this man who had once been a laughing child chasing seagulls along Mistral Harbor's shore. "My goal was justice, Thaddeus. Consequences proportionate to actions. You chose to steal from me, not just once in a moment of weakness, but systematically over months. You falsified documents. You replaced valuable artworks with forgeries. You embezzled from a charitable foundation. These were your choices." "To protect what father built," he countered, leaning forward. "You were making sentimental decisions, keeping outdated investments, refusing to modernize operations. The foundation was stagnating. The company was losing market share. I did what was necessary." "Necessary," I repeated. Interesting that what was necessary somehow resulted in millions transferred to your personal accounts. He had no answer for that, his gaze shifting away from mine. "If you had concerns about my management decisions, you could have discussed them openly," I continued quietly. "Presented evidence, made recommendations. Instead, you chose deception and theft. That speaks to your character, Thaddeus, not mine." "And now?" he asked after a moment. "What happens now? Reed tells me you've kept him on the foundation board, given him a path to redemption. Where is mine?" The question surprised me, not because of its content, but because of the raw emotion that briefly surfaced beneath his controlled exterior. "The same opportunity exists for you," I replied carefully. "Make full restitution. Demonstrate genuine remorse. Commit to ethical behavior going forward. The door remains open, Thaddeus. Whether you walk through it is your choice." He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "And if I believe your judgment is clouded by your illness? If I think you're making rash decisions in your final months?" Anger flared briefly within me, but I contained it. then you have learned nothing from this experience, and no reconciliation is possible. We sat in tense silence, the grandfather, clock in the hallway marking the seconds with its steady tick. Finally, Thaddeus rose, straightening his already immaculate jacket. "The restitution will be completed as agreed," he said, his voice once again coolly professional. "I'll inform you when the remaining artworks have been recovered." I stood as well, unwilling to let him leave on these terms. "Thaddeus, wait." He paused, his expression guarded. "Why did you come today?" I asked. "You could have sent a messenger with the Morisot. You could have called about the financial transfers. Why come in person?" Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or a glimpse of the vulnerability he worked so hard to conceal. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Perhaps I wanted to see if there was anything left to salvage." "And your conclusion?" He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the family photographs that decorated the mantelpiece. Images of happier times when our family bonds had seemed unbreakable. "I haven't decided yet," he said quietly. Then, with a brief nod, to Aviva, he turned and left. When the front door closed behind him, I sank back onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. Aviva brought me a glass of water, her expression concerned. "Are you all right?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Just tired," I assured her, though we both knew it was more than physical fatigue that weighed on me. That was unexpected. "The visit or the hint of humanity?" Aviva asked dryly. I smiled, despite myself. "Both, I suppose." "Do you think he's sincere about wanting reconciliation?" I considered the question carefully. "I think he wants something, but I'm not sure. He knows what. Thaddeus has always defined himself by achievement, by control. Now he's lost both." "And Imogen?" Aviva asked. "Any word from her?" "Not beyond the formal notification about the Morisot." I sighed, feeling the weight of maternal grief press against my chest. "She's always been the most like me, stubborn, principled in her own way. I suspect her pride is wounded more deeply than Thaddeus's." Aviva squeezed my hand gently. "Give her time." We both acknowledged the irony of that statement with sad smiles. The morning room transformed with the addition of the Morisot, its luminous colors bringing warmth to the space that seemed to extend beyond mere aesthetics. I found myself spending more time there in the days that followed, watching the harbor. Through the wide windows while the painted woman read eternally in her sunlit garden, my palliative care plan began in earnest that week, with a discreet rotation of nurses visiting Wisteria Cottage to monitor my condition and adjust medications as needed. Dr. Kincaid came every third day, his visits blending medical assessment with the compassion of long friendship. "The pain management is helping," I told him during one such visit, as he checked my vital signs with gentle efficiency. "I've been able to reduce the stronger medication during the day." He nodded approvingly. "Your tolerance is better than I expected. Just remember to stay ahead of the pain. Don't wait until it's severe to take your medication." "I'm trying to balance clarity with comfort," I explained. "There's still so much to accomplish." Dr. Kincaid's expression softened with understanding. He had known me long enough to recognize that I would approach dying, as I had approached living, with purpose and determination. "Just don't sacrifice too much comfort for productivity," he advised. "Pain drains energy you could otherwise use for what matters to you." What mattered to me became increasingly clear as autumn deepened. With my remaining strength, I focused on 3 priorities: finalizing the foundation's transition, continuing the recovery of our family's artworks, and nurturing the fragile reconciliation with Reed while leaving the door open for Thaddeus and Imogen should they choose to enter. Reed visited nearly every day, sometimes bringing work from the company for my review, other times simply sitting with me in the garden or by the fire as the evenings grew cooler. Our conversations ranged widely: discussions of business ethics, reminiscences about his childhood, plans for the foundation's future. "I've been thinking about establishing a photography program for teens," he told me one afternoon as we sorted through old family albums. "Using the medium to explore identity and community, the foundation could provide equipment and mentorship." I studied him over my reading glasses, noting the genuine enthusiasm in his expression. "That sounds like an excellent initiative. Why photography specifically?" He hesitated, then reached for his phone, scrolling through to show me a series of striking landscape images: Mistral Harbor at dawn, sea mist wreathing the lighthouse, waves breaking against the rocky shoreline in dramatic black and white. "You took these?" I asked, surprised by their quality and emotional resonance. He nodded, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "It's been a private passion for years, something separate from the family business, from expectations." I examined the photographs more carefully, seeing my son's perspective through this previously hidden talent. "They're beautiful, Reed. You have a genuine eye for composition." "Father never approved of artistic pursuits for me," he said quietly. "He thought they were a distraction from developing business acumen." The observation startled me. "Is that what he told you?" Reed nodded. "He said there was time for hobbies after I'd established myself professionally." I set the phone down, troubled by this revelation. "Your father loved the arts. It's why he started the foundation, why he collected so passionately. For others, yes. But for his children, especially his sons, he had different expectations." I wondered suddenly how many other misconceptions had shaped my children's choices. How many assumptions had gone unchallenged during our years together? Had Alaric really discouraged Reed's artistic interests, or had Reed misinterpreted his father's guidance? Had I been so absorbed in my own relationship with each child that I'd missed the dynamics between them? "I wish you'd shown me these years ago," I said finally. "I would have encouraged you." Reed's smile held a touch of sadness. "There are many things I wish I'd shared with you sooner, Mother. This is just one of them." The conversation stayed with me long after Reed had left, prompting deeper reflection on my role as a parent. Had I truly known my children, or merely the versions of themselves they had presented to me? Had I created an environment where they felt safe showing their authentic selves, their doubts and struggles and unconventional passions? These questions accompanied me into the night, lingering as I reviewed the latest foundation reports before bed. The restructured board had met twice more since the initial announcement, with Reed proving himself increasingly valuable in the discussions. His suggested photography program had been unanimously approved, with a pilot scheduled for the spring. The following morning brought another unexpected visitor, Ellis Montgomery, looking remarkably unchanged since his retirement 5 years earlier. At 73, he remained straight-backed and sharp-eyed, his white hair the only concession to advancing age. "Ellis?" I greeted him warmly, welcoming him into the morning room where the Morrisseau now hung. "How are you finding your return to corporate life?" "Challenging," he admitted, accepting the offered tea. "The company has changed considerably under Thaddeus's leadership, not all for the better." "Tell me," I invited, settling into my favorite chair by the window. For the next hour, Ellis outlined his assessment of Blackwood Enterprises, the strategic missteps, the cultural shifts away from the values Alaric had established, the promising areas for renewal. Despite his diplomatic phrasing, the picture he painted was concerning. A company that had prioritized short-term profits over long-term stability, aggressive expansion over sustainable growth. "The foundation is still solid," he concluded, "but significant course correction is needed." "And the staff? How have they responded to the leadership change?" Ellis considered his response carefully. "With mixed reactions. Relief from some who found Thaddeus's management style challenging, anxiety from others who benefited from his approach. curiosity from most about what comes next. "And what does come next, Ellis?" I asked, genuinely interested in his vision. "You didn't have to come out of retirement for this. You could have declined." He smiled slightly, the expression softening his usually reserved demeanor. "Alaric was more than my employer, Elowen. He was my friend. When you called, I couldn't refuse the chance to help preserve what he built." His loyalty touched me deeply. "The company needs stability during this transition, someone whose integrity is beyond question." "And after the transition?" Ellis asked pointedly. "What then?" I understood the question behind his question. "You're wondering about succession." He nodded. "Reed has potential despite his involvement in recent events. But he needs time to rebuild trust, to develop the leadership qualities that don't come as naturally to him as they did to Thaddeus." "I agree," I said, pleased that his assessment aligned with my own. "That's why I've been working with him on the foundation board first, a more controlled environment where he can develop those skills under supervision." "A wise approach," Ellis approved. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, we identify and nurture other talents within the company." I shared my thoughts on several promising executives who had been overlooked during Thaddeus's tenure. The company's future needn't rest solely on my children's shoulders. Ellis nodded thoughtfully. "Alaric would agree with that assessment, I think. He always believed in promoting from within, in recognizing merit wherever it appeared." We spent another hour discussing specific strategies for the company's restructuring, with Ellis taking careful notes in his precise handwriting. As he prepared to leave, he paused, his expression growing more personal. "Aviva told me about your diagnosis," he said quietly. "I'm deeply sorry, Elowen." "Thank you, Ellis." I appreciated his directness, the absence of platitudes. "Is there anything I can do? Anything at all?" I considered his offer, touched by its sincerity. "Just continue the work we've discussed. Knowing Blackwood Enterprises is in capable hands brings me peace." After Ellis departed, I found myself drawn to the small writing desk in the corner of the morning room, where generations of Blackwood women had penned their correspondence. Opening the drawer, I removed a stack of cream-colored stationery bearing the subtle embossed letterhead Alaric had designed as a gift for our 25th anniversary. For the next 2 hours, I wrote, not emails or text messages, but proper handwritten letters. One to each of my children, to be delivered after my death. One to Aviva, thanking her for a friendship that had sustained me through life's greatest joys and deepest sorrows. One to Dr. Kincaid, expressing gratitude for his compassionate care. Several more to longtime friends, colleagues, and community members who had enriched my life over the decades. Each letter contained memories, expressions of appreciation and hopes for the recipient's future. They weren't goodbye notes exactly, but rather distillations of what I most wanted to communicate while I still could. When I finished writing, I sealed each envelope and placed them in a wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother. I would give the box to Aviva with instructions for delivery when the time came. There was comfort in knowing these final messages would reach their destinations, even if I could no longer speak the words myself. The afternoon brought another delivery. The cassette, this time, returned as Reed had promised. The painting depicted a mother and child in intimate contemplation of a book, their heads bent together in a gesture of connection that transcended the century since its creation. I hung it immediately in the library where it belonged. As I was adjusting its placement, the doorbell rang again. Expecting another courier with perhaps another recovered artwork, I was surprised to find Imogen standing on the porch, her usual polished appearance slightly undermined by an uncharacteristic nervousness in her posture. "Mother," she said formally, "may I come in?" I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Unlike Thaddeus's visit, There was no Aviva present this time. She had gone to the foundation offices for the afternoon. Imogen followed me to the living room, declining my offer of tea with a small shake of her head. She remained standing even after I sat, her fingers fidgeting with the sleeve of her cashmere sweater. "The restitution is complete," she began, echoing Thaddeus's businesslike approach. "All financial transfers have been verified by our attorneys." "Yes," I confirmed. "I received notification from the bank yesterday." She nodded, a sharp, efficient movement. "Good. That's good." An awkward silence stretched between us. So unlike the easy conversations we'd once shared when she was younger, before ambition had hardened her natural intelligence into something more calculating. "Was there something else, Imogen?" I prompted gently. She took a deep breath, as if preparing for a difficult legal argument. "I've been considering your terms regarding community service. I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "Instead of general community service, I'd like to establish a legal aid clinic specifically for elderly citizens facing financial exploitation or abuse." Her words came more rapidly now, gaining momentum. "I've already secured office space and recruited 2 junior associates from my firm who are willing to provide services pro bono. We could begin operations within 30 days. The proposal caught me by surprise. Not just its content, but the evident thought and preparation behind it. "You've been planning this?" A hint of color touched her cheeks. "Since signing the agreement, I wanted to present a fully developed proposal rather than a vague intention. Typical Imogen, thorough, strategic, always prepared. But this time, those qualities were being directed towards something restorative rather than self-serving." "Why this specific focus?" I asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, her professional facade cracking slightly. "Because I understand it now," she admitted. Quietly. "What we did to you, what I participated in, wasn't just about money or assets. It was a fundamental betrayal of trust, and you're not the only one experiencing that kind of betrayal." I studied my daughter, looking for signs of the calculated manipulation I had come to expect. Instead, I saw something unfamiliar, genuine discomfort, perhaps even shame. "The clinic would provide free legal representation to seniors facing similar situations," she continued. "Not just reactive litigation, but preventative education, documentation services, advocacy." "And your role would be?" "Lead counsel and program director. 20 hours per week minimum for the next 5 years. Far exceeding the community service hours specified in our agreement." I considered her proposal carefully. Like everything Imogen did, it was meticulously planned and presented. Unlike her usual endeavors, however, it seemed to contain a seed of genuine reparation. "Why should I believe this isn't simply another strategic move, Imogen? Another way to rebuild your reputation without genuine change?" The question was direct, perhaps even harsh, but necessary. Imogen flinched slightly but met my gaze directly. "Because for the first time in my career, I'm proposing to use my skills to protect people like you instead of people like me," she said with unexpected rawness. "Because I've spent the past week unable to sleep, replaying our conversations, remembering the look in your eyes when you confronted us." She swallowed hard. "Because I'm ashamed, Mother. Deeply, genuinely ashamed of what I became willing to do." Her vulnerability, so unlike her usual armored self-presentation, startled me. In that moment, I glimpsed the daughter I remembered, from years ago, before corporate law and ambition had reshaped her. "The clinic would benefit from your expertise," I acknowledged, "and the concept aligns well with the Foundation's expanded mission." Imogen nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "I've already consulted with several elder law specialists to develop best practices, and I've identified potential funding sources beyond my personal contribution." "Always thorough," I observed with a small smile. You taught me to be prepared, she replied, the ghost of an answering smile touching her lips. We discussed the details of her proposal for another hour, the conversation gradually shifting from formal negotiation to something closer to our exchanges of years past. Thoughtful, intellectually engaging, punctuated by moments of shared understanding. I'll need to review the full proposal with the foundation board, I said finally. But if they approve, your alternative service arrangement would be acceptable to me. Thank you, she said simply. As she prepared to leave, she paused by the mantelpiece, her gaze lingering on a family photograph taken on my 60th birthday. The 5 of us smiling against the backdrop of Mistral Harbor, Alaric's arm around my shoulders, our children arranged before us. I don't know how to fix this, Mother, she said quietly, her back still turned to me. I don't know if it can be fixed. Neither do I admitted. But this is a beginning. She nodded once, composed herself, and left with the same purposeful stride that had carried her through courtrooms and corporate boardrooms. Yet something had shifted. A crack in the facade, a glimpse of the person beneath the polished exterior. That evening, as twilight settled over Mistral Harbor, I sat in the garden despite the autumn chill, wrapped in a shawl and my thoughts. The day's encounters with Ellis and Imogen had left me contemplating the nature of legacy, not just what we leave behind in material terms, but the values, relationships, and impact that outlast us. Alaric and I had built our lives around certain principles: integrity, compassion, community investment, artistic appreciation. We had tried to instill these values in our children with mixed results. Now, facing the end of my life, I was witnessing what felt like a recalibration. Reed embracing his artistic side while committing to ethical business practices, Imogen channeling her legal acumen toward protection rather than exploitation. Even Thaddeus showing hints of reflection beneath his anger. Was it enough? Would these fragile beginnings survive my passing, or would old patterns reassert themselves once I was no longer present to witness them? I had no answers, only hope. Hope that the seeds planted in these difficult conversations might continue to grow, that the consequences I had insisted upon might lead to genuine transformation rather than mere compliance. As darkness fell completely, I made my way back inside, my body protesting the day's activities with increasing discomfort. The pain was becoming more difficult to manage, a reality I acknowledged to myself even as I minimized it for others. In my bedroom, I took my evening medication and settled by the window with my journal. The lighthouse beam swept rhythmically across the harbor, a steady presence in the growing night. I began to write, documenting the day's events with the same care I'd given each entry over the years. When I finished the factual account, I added a more personal reflection. Today brought unexpected openings. Imogen's proposal, Ellis's dedication, the return of another painting. Small restorations in a landscape of loss. I find myself wondering what Alaric would make of all this, whether he would approve of my handling of our children's betrayal. He was always more inclined toward forgiveness than I am, more willing to see the best in others even when evidence suggested otherwise. Perhaps that quality is what I'm trying to recover now, not just the artworks or the financial assets, but the capacity to see beyond transgression to possibility, beyond broken trust to potential renewal, not naive forgiveness that ignores accountability, but the harder, more nuanced work of holding space for consequence and reconciliation simultaneously. I don't know if I'll live to see the full flowering of these tentative beginnings. The pain is worse today, the fatigue deeper. Dr. Kincaid's expression grows more concerned with each visit. But I've done what I can to set things right, to leave behind not just material assets but pathways toward healing. In the end, perhaps that's the most any of us can hope for. Not perfection, not complete resolution, but movement in the direction of what matters most. For me, that has always been integrity and connection. If my children recover these values, if they build lives guided by something deeper than acquisition, then my legacy will be secure regardless of what happens to the Blackwood name or fortune. The lighthouse continues its faithful rotation, guiding ships safely to harbor. Tomorrow will bring what it brings. For tonight, this is enough. November arrived with a sudden chill, frost etching delicate patterns across Wisteria Cottage's windows each morning. The harbor waters darkened to slate, mirroring the heavy skies that hung low over Mistral Harbor. I had always loved this season, the quiet withdrawal of nature, the contemplative quality of shortening days, the town's gradual turn inward as tourist season ended and locals reclaimed their spaces. This November felt different, infused with a poignancy I couldn't escape. As Dr. Kincaid had gently explained during his last visit, my condition was progressing more rapidly than initially projected. The timeline we had discussed in general, terms 6 to 8 months, was being revised downward. Perhaps 3 months, he'd said, his kind eyes holding mine steadily. Possibly less. I had received this news with outward calm, thanking him for his honesty, while Aviva squeezed my hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. Only later, sitting alone in the garden as twilight gathered, did I allow myself to absorb the full weight of this adjusted timeline. Christmas, perhaps. Not likely beyond. The urgency this knowledge created wasn't about fear, but about completion. Tying off loose ends, finalizing arrangements, creating closure where possible. And, unexpectedly, about experiencing simple pleasures with renewed appreciation. The taste of morning tea, steam rising from the cup as I watched fishing boats head out to sea. The particular quality of afternoon light on the cottage's eastern wall. The sensation of cool air filling my lungs during my increasingly abbreviated garden walks. "You should consider home hospice soon," Dr. Kincaid suggested during his next visit, noting my declining energy and increasing pain. "Not immediately, but we should have the framework in place before it becomes urgent." I nodded, practical as always. "I'd like to remain at Wisteria Cottage until the end, if possible." "That's absolutely feasible," he assured me. "We'll set up everything you need right here." After he left, I found myself drawn to the small secretary desk in the library, where family documents had been kept for generations. From its depths, I retrieved papers I had prepared months earlier, my advanced healthcare directive, power of attorney forms, detailed funeral instructions. Everything organized with my typical thoroughness, sparing my children the burden of guessing my wishes. I was returning these documents to their folder when Reed arrived, bringing a pot of homemade soup and fresh sourdough bread from the bakery near the harbor. These visits had become our new routine. 3 times weekly, he would appear with food, updates from the foundation, and a willingness to simply sit in companionable silence when my energy flagged. "You're looking at the directives," he observed, setting down the food and joining me at the desk. "Just confirming everything is in order," I replied. "Dr. Kincaid thinks we should prepare for home hospice soon." Reed nodded, absorbing this information with the same quiet acceptance he had shown since our reconciliation began. "What can I do?" "Just what you're doing," I said simply. "Being here, helping with the foundation, continuing your path." Later, as we shared the soup in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, Reed mentioned that Thaddeus had approached him after a business meeting the previous day. "He asked about you," Reed said, watching me carefully. "How you were feeling, whether you needed anything." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this expression of concern from my eldest. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That you're growing weaker, but still fully engaged in foundation matters. That you're focused on completing the recovery of the artworks." Did he mention the Klimt? This was the last significant piece still missing from our collection. The one Thaddeus had reported was proving difficult to recover. Reed hesitated. "He said he's located it in a private collection in Geneva. The buyer is resistant to returning it, even at a premium over their purchase price." I sighed, feeling a flicker of regret. The Klimt had been particularly special. To Alaric, a delicate drawing of intertwined lovers that had captured something essential about our relationship. Perhaps some things aren't meant to be recovered, I said after a moment. Reed studied me with a thoughtful expression. That doesn't sound like you, Mother. You've never been one to abandon a pursuit once begun. I smiled slightly at his perception. True, but I'm learning to distinguish between what matters most and what can be released. The drawing itself is just paper and ink. The love it represented exists independently of its recovery. When Reed left that evening, promising to return in 2 days, I found myself contemplating this theme of release. What else might I need to let go of before the end? What attachments, to possessions, to outcomes, to old hurts, were no longer serving me? The following day brought unexpected news in the form of a call from Ellis Montgomery. The board is meeting tomorrow to vote on Imogen's legal aid clinic proposal, he informed me. The preliminary response has been positive, especially given her detailed implementation plan and personal financial commitment. Good, I said, genuinely pleased. The concept has merit, regardless of its origins. There's something else, Ellis continued, his tone shifting slightly. Thaddeus has submitted his formal application for the Community Outreach Director position at the Foundation. This caught me by surprise. The position had been created during our recent restructuring, a role focused on expanding the Foundation's presence in communities beyond Mistral Harbor, particularly in underserved rural areas. Interesting, I responded, careful to keep my tone neutral. What's your assessment? Honestly, he's qualified on paper. His business development experience is relevant, and he has the connections we need. But given recent events, the board will need to evaluate his application on its merits, I said, while also considering the trust issues involved. After ending the call, I moved to the window seat in the morning room, gazing out at the harbor while processing this development. Was Thaddeus's application genuine, or merely another strategic move? Had he, like Imogen, found a way to align his skills with restitution, or was this simply about regaining position and influence? I was still contemplating these questions when Aviva returned from her afternoon at the Foundation offices, bringing with her the crisp scent of November air and a folder of documents requiring my signature. "You've heard about Thaddeus's application?" she asked, settling beside me with a cup of tea. I nodded. Ellis called earlier. And? Her raised eyebrow conveyed the question she didn't voice aloud. And I'm reserving judgment, I replied. The board will evaluate his application like any other. Aviva's expression turned skeptical. You don't find the timing suspicious? Just as his community service requirement begins, he applies for a position that would essentially professionalize that obligation? Of course I do, I acknowledged. But motivation and outcome don't always align neatly. If his skills can benefit the Foundation's work, does it matter whether his initial impulse was self-interest? It might, Aviva countered, if that self-interest prevents genuine change. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the conversation settling between us unresolved. Outside, the early darkness of November was gathering. Fishing boats, returning to harbor with their running lights creating moving constellations on the water. I've been thinking about forgiveness, I said finally, my voice quiet in the dimming room. Aviva turned toward me, her expression attentive. After 50 years of friendship, she recognized the weight behind my seemingly casual observation. What about it? She prompted gently. Whether it's something we grant others, or something we discover within ourselves, I mused. Whether it requires the other person's contrition, or can exist independently. And your conclusion? I smiled. Slightly. Still forming. But I'm beginning to think true forgiveness isn't a transaction. Something exchanged for apology or restitution. It might be more like release. letting go of the expectation that the past could have been different. Aviva considered this thoughtfully. That doesn't sound like letting your children off the hook. It isn't, I agreed. Consequences remain necessary. Boundaries remain important. But perhaps forgiveness is about freeing myself from the weight of betrayal, not freeing them from its impact. The next morning brought the first snow of the season, just a dusting that transformed Wisteria Cottage's garden into a fairy landscape of white outlined shapes. I watched the transformation from my bedroom window, having woken early with pain that took longer than usual to subside with medication. Dr. Kincaid had warned me about this progression, how the pain would gradually become more persistent, requiring higher doses or stronger medications to manage. So far, I had resisted the strongest options, preferring clarity over complete comfort. But I recognized that this balance would become increasingly difficult to maintain. Wrapped in my warmest robe, I made my way carefully downstairs, each step requiring more concentration than it had even a week ago. The cottage was quiet, Aviva having gone to the foundation offices for an early meeting. I welcomed the solitude, using the time to write in my journal and sort through correspondence that had accumulated over the past few days. Among the letters was a thick cream envelope bearing the embossed letterhead of Harrington and Walsh, Imogen's law firm. Inside was a formal document, Imogen's resignation letter, effective immediately. Attached was a personal note in her precise handwriting. Mother, by the time you receive this, my resignation will be official. I've accepted a significant reduction in income and professional status to focus on establishing the legal aid clinic we discussed. The foundation board votes today on my proposal. Whatever their decision, I am committed to this path. This isn't atonement. I understand that no single action can erase what happened. But it is, I hope, a step toward becoming someone you might one day be proud of again. With respect and regret, Imogen, I read the note twice, touched by both its formality and its vulnerability. Typical Imogen, expressing emotion through action rather than words, yet allowing a glimpse of the person beneath the polished exterior. I was still holding the letter when the doorbell rang. Opening the front door, I found a courier holding a long, carefully packaged tube. "Delivery for Aloan Blackwood," he announced, handing me a clipboard to sign. Inside, I unwrapped the package, with careful hands already suspecting its contents. As the final layer of protective material fell away, the Klimt drawing emerged. The delicate lines of the intertwined lovers, exactly as I remembered them. Tucked alongside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Mother, some things require more than money to recover. Thaddeus. The brevity was characteristic of my eldest, but the sentiment behind the gesture spoke volumes. He had found a way to recover what I had resigned myself to losing, had made a personal effort rather than delegating the task. I carried the drawing to the library, where its original frame still hung empty on the wall. As I carefully positioned it behind the glass, my hands trembled slightly, not just from physical weakness, but from the emotional weight of the moment. The last missing piece returned. Not just the artwork itself, but perhaps something more intangible. The phone rang as I was securing the frame back on the wall. It was Reed, his voice carrying an unusual urgency. "Mother, have you heard the news?" he asked without preamble. "What news?" I settled carefully into an armchair, suddenly weary from the morning's activities. Thaddeus withdrew his application for the foundation position, Reed explained. He sent a formal letter to the board stating that while he believes he could contribute value, he recognizes that trust must be rebuilt before he takes any official role. I glanced at the newly rehung Klimt, finding unexpected symmetry in this development. Interesting timing. "There's more," Reed continued. "He's offered to serve as an unofficial advisor to the Rural Outreach Program instead, without compensation or title." This was a significant departure from Thaddeus's usual approach. He had always valued position and recognition, had built his identity around titles and authority. And the board's response? I asked. They're considering it, Reed replied. Ellis thinks it could work, with appropriate boundaries in place. After the call ended, I remained in the library, contemplating these developments while gazing at the recovered drawing. The delicate lines of the embracing figures seemed to shimmer in the winter light filtering through the windows. Was it possible that my children were genuinely changing? That the consequences I had insisted upon had catalyzed not just compliance but transformation? Or was I seeing what I wished to see, a mother's hope overriding a clearer assessment? Perhaps the truth lay somewhere between, change beginning but incomplete, motivations mixed but evolving. Human growth rarely followed a straight line. It moved in spirals, circling back through old patterns while gradually ascending to new perspectives. That afternoon, as snowflakes began falling again outside the window, Dr. Kincaid arrived for his scheduled visit. His examination was gentle but thorough, his expression growing increasingly somber as he noted my vital signs and physical changes. The disease is progressing faster than expected, he confirmed, sitting beside me when the examination was complete. I think it's time to transition to home hospice care. We can have everything in place by tomorrow. I nodded, accepting this milestone with the same practical approach I had applied to previous transitions. What should I expect? He outlined the process with compassionate directness, how a hospital bed would be set up in the morning room, where I could still see the harbor, how nurses would provide round-the-clock care, how pain management would shift to prioritize comfort over consciousness as needed. And the timeline? I asked. The question we had been gradually refining over. Weeks. Dr. Kincaid hesitated, then met my eyes directly. A few weeks, possibly a month. Not Christmas, then. The knowledge settled over me, not with the shock it might have once carried, but with a quiet finality. My practical mind immediately began calculating what needed to be completed in the time remaining. I'd like to speak with my children, I said, all of them together. Can you help arrange that? He nodded, understanding the significance of this request. I'll call them myself. When would you like to meet? Tomorrow evening, I decided. After the hospice arrangements are in place. That night, I slept poorly, drifting in and out of awareness as pain ebbed and flowed beneath the medication's surface. During the lucid periods, I found myself mentally composing what I would say to my children. Not a final goodbye, not yet, but perhaps an opening toward whatever closure we might achieve in the time remaining. Morning brought a flurry of activity. As the hospice team arrived, transforming the morning room into a space that could accommodate my increasing medical needs, while maintaining the dignity and beauty of the home I loved. The hospital bed was positioned to face the wide windows overlooking the harbor, ensuring that even when confined to bed, I could watch the rhythms of Mistral Harbor continue. Boats coming and going, seabirds wheeling against the sky, the lighthouse standing sentinel at the harbor's edge. Aviva supervised these arrangements with characteristic efficiency, ensuring everything was positioned exactly as I preferred. When the medical team departed, promising to return that evening to begin the regular care rotation, she sat beside me on the newly installed bed. Are you comfortable? She asked, adjusting pillows with practiced hands. As much as possible, I assured her. Thank you for managing all this. She waved away my gratitude. 50 years of friendship comes with certain privileges and responsibilities. This is both. Later that afternoon, as the winter sun began its early descent, Dr. Kincaid called to confirm that all 3 of my children had agreed to come that evening. 7 o'clock, he said. I'll be present as well to answer any medical questions they might have. Thank you, I said simply, grateful for his continuing kindness. At precisely 7 they arrived. First Reed, then Imogen, finally Thaddeus. Dr. Kincaid ushered them into the morning room where I now rested, propped against pillows but dressed in a silk blouse rather than a nightgown. my hair arranged and a touch of color applied to my increasingly pale cheeks. They entered hesitantly, struck by the transformation of the room and what it signified. Reed immediately came to my side, taking my hand with gentle pressure. Imogen followed, her composed expression betrayed by the tension in her shoulders. Thaddeus remained slightly apart, his face unreadable, but for a flickering in his eyes as he took in the hospital bed and medical equipment. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I had feared it might be. "As you can see, my condition has changed. Dr. Kincaid can explain the medical details, but the essence is simple. My time has become very limited." Dr. Kincaid stepped forward, outlining my prognosis and care plan with professional compassion. I watched my children's faces as they absorbed this information. Reed's open grief, Imogen's careful control, Thaddeus's stoic mask gradually slipping to reveal genuine concern. When the doctor finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the windows, illuminated by the last rays of sunset over Mistral Harbor. "I wanted to speak with all of you together," I continued, "not to assign blame or revisit past actions, but to look forward, to talk about what happens next." "Mother, you don't need to worry about arrangements," Imogen began, falling back on practicality. "I've already reviewed your directives and—" I raised my hand gently, stopping her. "I'm not talking about funeral arrangements or legal matters. Those are all documented and organized." I smiled slightly. "You know me well enough to expect nothing less." "Then what?" Thaddeus asked, speaking for the first time. "I'm talking about you, about the three of you, and what happens after I'm gone." I looked at each of them in turn. "About the choices you'll make when I'm no longer here to witness them." Reed squeezed my hand, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll honor your wishes. The foundation, the company, everything will continue as you've directed." "That matters," I acknowledged. "But what matters more is whether you'll continue the work you've begun in yourselves. Whether the changes I've glimpsed in recent weeks are genuine and lasting, or merely temporary adjustments to avoid consequences." Imogen moved closer, perching carefully on the edge of the bed. "The legal aid clinic is proceeding regardless of anything else. That's my commitment to you." Thaddeus remained standing, his posture straight, but less rigid than usual. "And I'll continue advising the rural outreach program, whether officially recognized or not." I studied my three children, so different from each other, yet each carrying elements of Alaric and myself in ways I hadn't fully appreciated before. "Those specific commitments matter less to me than the principles behind them," I said quietly. "What I hope for each of you is that you find your way back to the values that built our family and this community: integrity, compassion, service." "Even after what we did?" Thaddeus asked, the question holding layers of meaning. "Especially after," I replied. "Because now you understand the cost of abandoning those values. You've experienced both sides, the hollow satisfaction of acquisition, at any cost, and the deeper fulfillment of restoration and service." The conversation continued as twilight deepened into evening, moving gradually from my hopes for them to practical matters of care and visitation in the coming weeks. Dr. Kincaid explained the progression I could expect, preparing them gently but honestly for what lay ahead. When they finally left, Reed with a lingering embrace, Imogen with a formal but heartfelt kiss on my cheek, Thaddeus with an unexpected moment of vulnerability as he gripped my hand tightly before departing, I felt a sense of completion beginning to form. Not perfect resolution, not fairy tale reconciliation, but something authentic and sufficient. Aviva returned after showing them out, settling into the chair beside my bed. "You did well," she observed. "Better than I expected, given your condition." "Maternal determination," I replied with a tired smile. "One last push to set things right." "And did you set things right?" I considered her question, watching the snowflakes illuminate briefly in the beam from the lighthouse before disappearing into the darkness. As right as possible, given the circumstances. The rest is up to them. In the days that followed, as November deepened and my strength continued to fade, each of my children established new patterns of presence. Reed came daily, often bringing his camera to show me recent photographs or simply sitting beside me reading aloud when I lacked energy for conversation. Imogen visited every other day, her initial awkwardness gradually giving way to more natural interactions as she shared updates about the legal aid clinic's development. Thaddeus came less frequently but with increasing openness, our conversations moving gradually from business matters to more personal reflections. One particularly clear afternoon, as winter sunlight streamed through the windows and turned the harbor waters to burnished silver, I found myself alone for a brief period between nurse visits and family arrivals. Using the strength I had carefully conserved that morning, I opened my journal one last time, recording what I sensed would be my final entry. The snow continues, transforming Mistral Harbor into a scene from a fairy tale. From my window, I can see the lighthouse standing sentinel against the whiteness, its beam barely visible in the bright afternoon light, but faithfully rotating nonetheless. It strikes me as an apt metaphor for what I've tried to do these past months, maintain a steady signal through darkness and storm, guiding my children back to safer harbors. Whether they follow that guidance once I'm gone remains their choice, but I've done what I could to illuminate the way. The artwork has been recovered piece by piece, the financial restitution completed, the foundation restructured to carry forward our values. These material restorations matter, but the deeper restoration of integrity, of family bonds, of trust, remains incomplete, a work in progress that will continue beyond my lifetime. I find, somewhat to my surprise, that I am at peace with this incompleteness. Life rarely gives us tidy endings or perfect resolutions. What matters is movement in the right direction, and I see that movement in each of my children now, halting and imperfect, but genuine. Alaric would say I've done enough, that it's time to rest, to release the weight of responsibility I've carried. Perhaps he's right. The lighthouse keeps its vigil, but even its keeper must eventually sleep. The harbor lights will continue to shine. The foundation will continue its work. My children will continue their journeys. And I will watch over it all for a little while longer, from this window that frames the world I've loved so well. And then I will rest. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.